Again, the working language of this English presentation contest is English, so I will speak in English. Honorable judges, distinguished speakers and students, good afternoon. I'm pleased to announce to officially open the 8th English presentation contest. And this year, the theme of this year is general theme is diversity and inclusion in the workplace, views and solutions from students. There is a growing importance on how to sustain the diversity in the workplace. So with that, I'll expect the 6 groups are expected to present their views and solutions from student perspective. And this year we have distinct 6 teams, and there will be 2 different sessions. The first session we will have 3 teams presentation, and each presentation should be less than 10 minutes. And as I told you before, that after 9 minutes, you are given a notice by liking in the bell. Also, you will give a notice like 1 minute left. After 10 minutes, every 30 seconds, you will give a minus point. So you are really encouraged to finish your presentation within 10 minutes. After the presentation, the 5 minutes question and answer session will follow. And basically, the judges will give you questions, but students are also encouraged to make good and critical questions. And now I'd like to introduce the honorable judges. From the Faculty of School of Business Administration, we have Hugh Graham Sensei, Professor Graham. Thank you for coming. And Professor Yamashita, Professor Sumi, and Professor Kaneko. Thank you for coming. In addition to the judges from the faculty, I'm very pleased to announce we have 2 additional honorable judges. First, I'd like to introduce Professor Emeritus, Professor Yi. Thank you for coming. As I told you before, this is the 8th years of the English presentation contest. 80 years ago, he started this English presentation contest. So he's a founder of this English presentation contest. So I'm pleased to having him as honorable judges. Thank you for coming. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Mr. Lamla Nathan. He's a CEO of a Kailon Group, and he has vast experience working in multinational financial institutions such as UBS and Macquarie's. And he will give us a speech as a guest speaker after the 6th presentation. Thank you for coming. Now that, so that's all for now, and I'd like to start the first session composed of 3 teams. So judges, are you ready? Okay. Now, as a first presenter, I'd like to invite Ko Jin Jami and Ko Hyun. They will talk on the disability inclusion. So please come to the podium.
Honorable judges, students, good afternoon. My name is Ko Jin Jamie, and today, together with my group member Ko Hyun, we'll be having a presentation about diversity and inclusion in workplace, as well as views and solutions from students. As diversity and inclusion is a very wide and vast topic, today we would like to focus on disability inclusion.
There are various definitions of diversity. Based on the textbook that we are learning in intercultural communication class, it says that diversity is the differences among humans in terms of society, aspects of culture, language, physical abilities. and so on. We highlighted physical abilities in red because the main topic of our presentation is disability. And next is inclusion. Inclusion is the act of giving all people in society an opportunity to participate regardless of their backgrounds or characteristics.
Okay, so there are various reasons why we chose disability inclusion as our topic today. During the last semester, I took the sign language class in our university, and I also got the opportunity to visit a school for the mute and deaf nearby Meiji University, and it had me thinking that what can students do to increase the awareness on diversity and inclusion as well as disability inclusion.
And also, my mom has been working in massage parlor with staff who are blind. She says that although they are talented and has many good skills, they can only jobs in massage parlor. So I think if the society is more open to those with disabilities in the workplace, they can get opportunities more in the future.
Okay, so what is disability? So based on the online dictionary Merriam-Webster, disability is a physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes, or limits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks. And based on the data from the World Bank, almost 1 billion people, or 15% of the world's population, are experiencing some form of disability. And it's said to be higher in percentage in countries, in developing countries. So as we all know, there are almost 7 billion people in the world today. And if 1 billion people are experiencing disability, this means that 1 in every 7 people are facing some sort of disability. And also, based on the data from World Economic Forum, 80% of these people acquire their disability between the ages 18 and 64. And this is the average working age for most, and almost 50% or more are likely to be unemployed. And take the United States as an example. So there are about 15 million people of working age living with disabilities, and they're underemployed. So based on this graph, there are only 29 people of disability are employed compared to those who have no disability. And if companies are to embrace disability inclusion, they would gain access to a new talent pool of more than 10.7 million people. Okay, so based on a survey we have conducted with Meiji University students, there's a question saying that, are you aware of the benefits of diversity and inclusion? And based on the results, 66% of the students answered no. So we realized that as students, we can help to raise awareness of diversity and inclusion, as well as disability inclusion.
So what can students do? We think that there are 3 steps to encourage disability inclusion. The first one is take part in awareness activities. Second one is education. And lastly, survey and experiment. Firstly, we want to introduce some campaign in our home countries. In Malaysia, there is a campaign, Walking for Sight and Sound. This campaign is raise awareness to help disabilities for blind. And in my home country, South Korea, there is a campaign, Future Makers. This campaign is a marathon that blind people could also participate. And also, students can visit the volunteer center and take part in volunteer activities also. And lastly, about the education, students can take part in sign language classes. And if the students think that taking sign language classes is time-consuming, they just came to visit the sign language cafe in Meiji University and learn the basic sign languages on lunch break. And lastly, students can learn by YouTube videos by watching basic sign languages video clips.
Okay, so the last method that we're going to introduce today is through surveys and experiment. So for the past 3 weeks, we have conducted a survey and experiment with the Meiji University students. And the survey is split into 2 parts. One is to be answered before the experiment and one to be answered after the experiment. So, so one of the questions is, have you ever communicated with people with hearing disabilities? And the result shows that almost 54% of the students answered no. So this is why we took interest into conducting an experiment about ways to communicate with people with hearing disabilities. So this is how the experiment is conducted. The aim for this experiment is to raise awareness of disability inclusion and also let students learn about ways to communicate with people with hearing disabilities. So the rules are the students are split into two teams, Team A and Team B. So Team A are the ones that are listening to music with their earphones, and Team B will try to communicate with students as instructed on the received card. And here is some of the pictures when the experiment is conducted. As you can see, the students here are trying to communicate by using either body language or some lip movements. And this is a short video clip. As you can see, the student over here, he's trying to explain the word weather by using body language. And these are also some more photos for the experiment. So the experiment was conducted in the Meiji library discussion rooms, as well as in classrooms. And this is another video clip. So as you can see, the students over here are having their earphones on, and the students over here are trying to communicate by handwriting or some body languages or lip movements. Yes.
After the experiment ended, students required to fill out the after-experiment survey, and this is the results. Before, about 69% students think that it would be not easy to communicate with people with hearing disabilities. And after the experiments, about 60% of students think it might be not easy to communicate with people with hearing disabilities, which means about 9% of students think it might be easy to communicate with people with hearing disabilities. And here are some feedbacks from students. Student A mentions that it was meaningful and learned how to respect them. And student B mentions that he found that there are many patterns to communicate with them and pay more attention to their lip movements when communicating with them.
Okay, and this is the feedback from student C. She says that although she had played this game similar to this experiment in the past, but she did not realize that it was related to those with hearing disabilities. And now she understands that she needs to have patience when communicating with people who has hearing disabilities. So in summary, what can students do to raise awareness or encourage disability and inclusion? So we believe there's 3 ways. One is to take part in awareness activities, number 2 through education, and number 3 through surveys and experiment. So in conclusion, if students take initiatives such as mentioned above to learn more about those with disabilities, students would gradually develop a positive attitude towards those with disabilities. So in future, students would eventually graduate and from universities and enter the workforce. So these individuals are more open-minded and understanding towards people with disabilities. So I strongly believe that these individuals would help promote and encourage disability and inclusion at the workplace in the future. So this is how to say thank you in the Japanese Sign Language.
ありがとうございました。
So it would be great if everyone could follow us and do it together in the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3.
ありがとうございました。
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Now that I'd like to invite any questions from judges. Yes, please.
Yes, please.
It seems like, okay, sorry. So it seems like in your presentation you focused
pretty much on sensory disabilities, right?
Yes.
Hearing and sight.
Yes.
Other kinds of disabilities are physical or mental disabilities.
Yes.
So do you think a similar approach would work for those other kinds of disabilities?
Yes,
Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that when we communicate with people with disabilities, I think the most important part is to have much understanding and patience. So if we have more patience and understanding towards individuals with disabilities, I think that it will help very much. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Even from the student side? Yes, please.
Do you think that sign language class should be implemented in schools as part of the curriculum?
Oh, okay. I know that sign language is not a very easy language to learn, but maybe some basic sign language classes or like short sign language classes, as we have in the Meiji Volunteer Center. They have short sign language classes during the lunch break that would be very helpful towards understanding of those who have hearing disabilities. Thank you.
Any other questions, please? Yes.
Thank you. Can you go back to the slide for the Pinan, what is like some kind of activity? Pinan and the Seoul, you have like, yeah, 12.
Sorry,
it doesn't come.
it's not responding
Okay.
right now.
All right.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I just wonder if
Yes.
there is any kind of similar thing going on in Japan. Because you're asking Meiji students, right?
Yeah.
So there might be some ways to kind of connect those things. Let's say, like, you ask the students to participate in this experiment,
Yeah.
for example. Then they may be introduced to some outside this type of activity if it exists.
Yeah.
Or maybe you could start forming, creating something like that. Something. Have you thought about that?
I did not, but maybe like in the future, if I got the opportunity to hold this kind of activity, I hope that students would participate in the activity. But I believe that if students would approach the volunteer center in Meiji University, they would be happy to provide any advice or introduce some activities for students to take part in.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I have another question, but
Yes.
with some clarification. Your presentation did not really touch directly on how to include
Yes.
the disability in the workplace.
Yeah.
But by increasing kind of awareness or acceptance
Yes.
in the education, that will eventually lead to
Yes.
include the disability in the workplace. Is it logic? Your logic? Just clarification.
Yeah, because the presentation is also views and solutions from students. So we believe that as students, what we can do during our university days is to maybe raise awareness and have more understanding on those who have disabilities. So when we graduate and we enter the workforce, we would be more open and we would be more respectful to those who have disabilities, and we would like promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace in the future. That's our view.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question from the floor? Yes.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. Do you think there should be a law enforcing corporations to hire a certain percentage of employees being disabled people?
Yes, in my opinion, I think that there is a there is a need to implement this kind of law because, as I explained in the previous slides, if businesses are open into including people with disabilities in the company, they would gain access to a new talent pool, and they would benefit from many things. So I think that it's a must. I mean, it's necessary to implement this law in the future. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I could take one more questions, maybe? Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for that
Thank you.
presentation. Very, very interesting, and I like to see the interactive activities with the students. That's very encouraging to see.
Thank you.
This is a little bit of a tough question, I think, but to be completely honest, sometimes there are certain disabilities that mean someone is not able to do a certain job. And as much as we want to encourage them and support them, it may just not be possible. So in that type of a situation, or where there's a job that maybe it's not possible for someone to do because of that disability, how would you recommend going about encouraging them or being inclusive of them despite that hurdle?
Can you just give me 1 minute to think about it?
Of course, yes.
Thank you.
It's I'm not saying anybody has the answer to this question, but I'm very curious to hear your
Yeah,
thoughts.
Nathan's question is very critical because one of the reasons that most of the disabilities are still remain unemployed is a mismatching of their needs and their capacities.
You mean like a blind pilot?
Exactly. Maybe computers can do it.
Yes.
Or even very simplistically, if you're working a cash register, and you're blind,
Right.
it's possible, but it's very difficult.
30 seconds left. For students, it's a good strategy to compose to think about it. If you get tough questions.
Okay, in my opinion, I think that companies would, it's very important that companies understand their condition. So maybe after like fully understanding their condition and of course like the work that they, after understanding their conditions and maybe, fit appropriate work for them to do would be a very important step to, I'm sorry, that's me.
Well, that's great. As I said, I don't think there's any easy answer to that question.
Yes.
I was just very curious to hear your thinking, and
Okay.
you've clearly done a lot of work and thought about, particularly blind and deaf disabilities, which is very easy to see how there's some jobs they would not be able to do. But as Professor Kikuchi mentioned, that mismatch is a challenge we all face in society. But it's important that we think about how we can help those.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll never make it in the NBA.
Okay, time is up. Again, thank you very much for you are the first speaker. You have been very nervous, but you did a very good job. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I am Tsubasa, and they're my teammates, Rui and Arya. So today we are here to talk about what makes diversity and inclusion fail. As people's needs and wants get more and more diverse due to the recent globalization, diversity and inclusion has become one of the most famous business principles out there. In fact, a lot of companies are implementing diversity and inclusion programs. If you take a look at any random company's website in Japan, there is a high possibility that you can find the terms in it. Despite being so famous and popular among businesses, some of the companies seem to have problems in implementing diversity and inclusion programs successfully. Why is that? So, in this presentation, we are going to look closely at these principles, break down the underlying factors of the problems, and propose a set of solutions to them in terms of maximization of business performances. So, first thing first, let me briefly clarify what diversity and inclusion are. So diversity, or diversity program, refers to a management approach which enhances the diversity of a company and utilizes it as a source of competitive advantage. And inclusion, or inclusion program, also refers to a management approach which complements and supplements the diversity programs. More specifically, diversity program is just a means to achieve three core purposes. The first one is a facilitation of innovations. By accepting and incorporating various perspectives, it is more likely that they can create new and innovative ideas. The second one is accommodation of diverse customers' needs. So needs from customers are always rapidly changing. So the company should be able to address those needs from various customers with employees with diverse and relevant skills. The third one is enhancement of flexible problem-solving ability. So in order to prepare for possible contingencies, diverse skills should be contained and internalized in the company. So these three should be kept in mind here. So speaking of diversity, in this presentation, we've classified the diversity into two types. One of them is demographical diversity, and the other one is task-based diversity. So what's the difference? So demographical diversity is the diversity in terms of demographical characteristics such as gender, age, nationality, and ethnicity. And task-based diversity, on the other hand, is the diversity in terms of experience, expertise, or capabilities of executing specific tasks such as financing, management, IT, tax, languages, and so forth. So we are going to build on this classification.
Then, going back to the first question, what problems make diversity and inclusion program fail? Originally, the diversity program should be the means to achieve three core purposes that was mentioned earlier. However, some Japanese corporations confuse this relationship and turns diversity program into the end instead of the means. In other words, the mere implementation of diversity program has become a sole purpose. One of the examples of it is to increase the demographic diversity by hiring minority people, such as women or foreigners, without a good reason. Indeed, demographic diversity is much more visible and explicit to everyone than task-based one. So, companies can show this campaign to external parties easily and say we are promoting diversity. However, in this case, the diversity program will lose its substance because it is not aligned with its core purposes. Indeed, the many Japanese corporations have been striving to increase the demographic diversity in workplace. However, the labor productivity has not improved over the years. As this graph shows, the effort for accepting diversity is not leading profit in Japan. For example, many Japanese corporations have tried to increase the number of female workers. Japan Railway, JR, is one of them. In our interview, the manager says that we are aiming to increase the number of female workers to 30% of workforce in new graduates. This shows wrong attitude for diversity. JR is aiming to increase the number of female workers itself without clear purposes. As a result, the JR's financial performance has not worked well. And then, in addition, as another problem, inclusion is often neglected compared to diversity. They tend to emphasize the diversity because it is much more visible. For instance, Japan business system is promoting diversity and intending to increase the foreign employees. However, it has not created the flexible environment. Although they do have the remote work system, the privilege is limited to certain department, and also it is required a lengthy process every time. inclusion program is important to tackle as much as diversity program. It is inclusion that integrates the high diversity into the productive workforce. High diversity without inclusion is just a chaos.
Then how we can prevent this problem from happening? We are going to propose two solutions, and that's very simple. And first, as we explained, one of the problems companies have with is that it is not aligned with the core purposes of diversity. Therefore, we propose to choose a type of diversity suitable for each purpose and increase them respectively. First, if the company wants to facilitate innovation and new ideas, it should increase demographical diversity. Innovative idea is often derived from many different perspectives of heterogeneous workforce. And next, if the company wants to deal with diverse needs of customers, and enhance its problem-solving ability, it should increase the task-based diversity. It is clear-cut about its target customers and problem it is facing, and hire suitable employees for them. In this way, company can strategically increase the type of diversity suitable for specific purposes. Next. Second, as Rui explained, so what he explained, I forgot. High diversity without inclusion could be a chaos, right? Therefore, we like to propose to create a diverse working environment for them. More specifically, we should allow diverse ways of working, such as remote work and flex time system, which allow diverse ways of working and making its employees to feel comfortable. For example, ZOZO allow workers to work remotely and whenever they want in order to maximize their productivity and prevent performance decrement, such as commuting time and bad weather and so on. And they also allow workers to work 6 hours in a day in order to adjust personnel system accordingly. And as a result, labor productivity from last October to last December increased 25% compared to usual. This is very impressive. Therefore, this is because ZOZO integrates diverse workforce by allowing diverse ways of working and making its employees to feel comfortable.
So in summary, not only should they be aware of the types of diversity and strategically enhance them, but they should also further the implementation of inclusion to make a comfortable workplace that allows for diverse ways of working. Above all, as a conclusion, despite its prevalence, we shouldn't mindlessly implement diversity and inclusion programs. We should first clarify the purposes of these campaigns and then figure out the consistent and suitable ways to achieve them. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. My impression of your presentation is your definition and scope of diversity sounds more diverse than other presentation. Okay, I'd like to take questions, clarifications. Questions, yes, please.
Once again.
No, please.
Apologies, I've been asking the first question. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation and analysis. I just had one question about you. I think it was in Rui's portion of the talk. You were looking at profit as a measure of the effectiveness of diversity, and I was just wondering if there are problems in drawing conclusion about how effective diversity is just by looking at operating profit, because there are so many other factors, the stage in the business cycle, technological change, and all the other things that sort of factor into profit or loss for a business. So I was just wondering if you could address that a little bit.
Okay, thank you for your question. So first, JR, Japan Railway, receives subsidy from the government. So it's gonna overstate the net income of the company. So that's why we use operating profit. But yeah, it might be a little bit too too selective. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
すみません。
Yes.
Thank you. It was very intriguing, presentation, and I really, enjoyed when you talked about actually, the gap between, how programs are serving for just meeting with a goal, and actually, the program should be supposed to be serving for means to achieve a goal, but in reality, many companies just take it to the end. And relating to that, well, basically, you guys dealing with Japanese corporation, right? Right? And so, and Yamamoto-kun, and you were talking about remote work, and usually what we hear these days is remote work in the Japanese corporation are not really getting popular, mainly because of lack of trust, partly, and partially the work responsibility in the Japanese context and usually shared among plural employees, not individual. So in that case, remote work is a difficult concept to really just just do that in the Japanese corporation. How do you think about it?
I don't think it's difficult at all, because these days it's
because most of company nowadays are using PC, and they don't need to let's say if they do the meeting with the customers in the team or something, they can do the meeting without in person. Just if they have a laptop or something, they can do the communicate. So it's no problem. And nowadays I saw the news every day in the morning, and then most of topic nowadays are remote work. So I think most of manager and so on starting realizing, so that should be fine, and remote work will be accepted in Japanese society.
okay.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Well, I like the way you pointed out what's going on in Japanese companies and try to describe the situation specifically. That's great. But I want to just clarify one thing. Well, you mentioned we should focus more on inclusion instead of just promoting diversity, right? And you also mentioned remote work thing, as Mrs. pointed out, and Ross did. In order to promote inclusion, what can we do? Is the remote work is the recommendation of yours, and it's a kind of benchmark thing, or what do you think? So to promote inclusion, what do you think they should do, or what kind of things, or what kind of actions are actually productive or effective?
Thank you for your question. Maybe they can do this experiment. I mean, try to implement remote work or the flex time system, just for experiment, and see how it goes, and then they can be sure that this is good or bad and make a decision. So that's the first step to implement. I mean, further inclusion to have
as I showed the survey, an experiment of Ninjojo, their productivity increased 25%, and we should emphasize this survey, this result to the others. So people don't know this, so we didn't input these things in the presentation, but we should actually need to come up with some idea to spread this result and idea. So that's the next step we need to do. Thank you for giving a question.
Thank you. Okay, I may take one last question. This is not a question, but just a comment. The term in your presentation, the term you used one very important term, the accommodation. To accommodate, especially in the context of the inclusion of the disability, reasonable accommodation. This is a very important keyword, how to have a reasonable accommodation. So I highly appreciate you found this very important words. So you may remember the words reasonable accommodation. This is very important keyword. I thank you very much for using this important phrase. Okay, if there is no question, I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to make our presentation here today. My name is Ampir, and this is my teammate Kohei, and this is Liana. I hope you enjoy our presentation today. And personally, I think it's funny that we are the last learner then when we are going to talk about the first step. Well, ironic. Yeah. Anyway, diversity and inclusion. The term has been emphasized as a solution to some of the major problems Japanese society currently has. But however, the realization of these values still seems quite difficult. So today, we want to talk about what kind of issues in diversity and inclusion in the Japanese organizations mainly, and like why it is important, what kind of obstacles we have, and what could be a fundamental solution. So here is the outline of our presentation. So in introduction part, we're going to introduce some definition of diversity and inclusion shortly, and why it is important in Japanese organization. Second problem, we're gonna talk about some major issues in Japanese organization about implementing diversity and inclusion. And third, our solution. Fourth, conclusion.
As many participants already talked about the definition of diversity and inclusion, it is to accept various types of human resources, and inclusion means that utilizing individuals, employees. So simply speaking, it's all about accepting different types of people and making all of them happier in order to achieve better results. So there's a lot of benefits of diversity and inclusion in Japan. So especially in Japan, proper implementation of diversity and inclusion has become an important strategic objective. So as a solution for the continuing decrease in the labor population first, and the second is the low productivity issue of white-collar workers. So while more and more people continue to emphasize the necessity and benefits of diversity and inclusion in Japan, it is also that true. Many organizations have problems to accept it.
So what are the hurdles of the implementation of the diversity in Japanese organizations? Any guesses or ideas? Well, according to a survey, the main three issues are managers' lack of understanding diversity, and a strong organizational culture that does not embrace diversity, and last, a work culture that does not accept flexibility. Therefore, problems are existing not only at an individual level, but also at a corporate and cultural level and a work style level across the entire organization. Then what could be a solution to overcome those obstacles? Well, so far we have spent so much time investigating previous researches and practical solution cases. What we found is that there has been so much noise on this topic for a few years, so it's very hard to decide what are the do's and don'ts. This is because these issues about diversity are usually very complicated, which means it's not going to be concluded by like one big idea. It needs a variety of approaches across the organization, including
education, training, networking, establishing proper rules, regulations, and so on. And these approaches should be done frequently also in the long term. But at the last minute, we noticed a term that has been mentioned repeatedly in many companies' cases. At first, we overlooked at it because it seems so obvious and fundamental. It is unconscious bias.
Before why we argue this as an important term for the issue, let us explain what it is. So again, what is unconscious bias? It is a stereotype about a person or group that individuals form outside their awareness. And the problem is this affects a lot to our daily mental processing. So in fact, scientists said that more than 99% of our mental processing is ruled by unconscious bias. And these biases, for example, unconscious biases can be a preference for appearance, the same hometown or school, or even a certain name. And these biases can contribute to the hiring process, performance assessment, or any kind of the corporate decision-making process. So, according to a survey, according to research, candidates will receive more callbacks when they use European American names such as James, Brian, Andrew, rather than African American names such as Jamal, Tyron, and so on, even with the exact same resume.
So, why it is important to solve diversity issues in Japan? It's because those issues that we mentioned before, are mostly caused by biases. So, for instance, let's think about the strong organizational culture problem. It may include something like the traditional values or expectation of women or men, or it could be something like a preference for monoracial or monoethnic society, right? So, moreover, unconscious bias affects inclusion directly. You could say bias impacts retention, which means bias make people quit their job. A study shows that those who perceive bias tend to leave their workplace within a year by more than 3 times more than the others, compared with the others. Therefore, discussing diversity and inclusion without unconscious biases is not enough to get to the core of the problem. So, Google believes that unconscious bias has a huge impact on corporate decision-making processes, so the company has been making various efforts to reduce from their decision-making processes. We also found that several Japanese companies are trying to same method, like reduce unconscious bias in their workplace in their own way. But in most cases, the solution process starts with recognizing unconscious bias. Then what is important here is how can people recognize their unconscious bias? The most common method is called IAT, or Implicit Association Test, and this is the sample image of IAT test, where it's a test to detect the person's subconscious biases by making a subject to judge something very quickly and very repeatedly. Another way of doing this is getting involved to workshops or seminars. So for example, another Google's case, they have their workshop, their own conducted workshop called Unconscious Bias at Work, which made an improvement in one score of self-awareness about unconscious biases compared to his or her previous score, or also to the others of those who never attended the workshop. And also, we have to think about how can they resolve it. Well, there are several ways of doing this, but just briefly, collaborating with different groups, it really helps you, because when you collaborate with different groups, you have to think about the differences between you and them. And also, let employees have accountability or autonomy on what they're doing. It also helps because then the employee need to able to justify their decision making.
And here's a graphic that shows our understanding of the entire solution. First, we need to recognize unconscious bias, and then it is important to resolve them. And after that, other solutions can be committed with a solid base of our understanding about diversity and inclusion. So
by having awareness about our own unconscious biases, we can have mutual understanding of diversity and inclusion. So without this step, the diversity and inclusion education or training is merely another time-consuming session without insightful discussion. So therefore, only after employees have become aware of their unconscious bias, other solutions can be more effective.
So far, we looked at why diversity and inclusion are important, what obstacles there are, and how they relate to unconscious bias. Resolving unconscious bias might be really just a small issue, while there are remaining of a huge task, the true realization of diversity. The important thing is to realize what kind of unconscious bias you have so that when we are trying to make a decision making, it doesn't block us. So we think that other solutions can be more effective, and the true means of diversity and inclusion on workplace can be achieved only after recognizing your unconscious bias adequately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that is a question and answer session. I'd like to take any questions, comments, clarifications. Yes, please.
Thank you. It was a very interesting presentation. And your point, is clearly taken, and I think, the importance placed on unconscious bias is a very interesting point. And as an academic person, it's quite interesting to point out. But actually, how do you, put into a policy level this discussion, for example? Because simply pointing out to the people, the audience, even including SNS, that an unconscious bias is very important, but actually, how do you promote, this awareness? Like basically education, or how do we, just promote this awareness? Actually, how do you do that? In addition to simply pointing out, unconscious bias is very important. Probably it won't work, just in immediate sense. You need more concrete steps to realize it.
Yes, so I think many organizations already adopted this test, which is IAT, like we mentioned in the slide. So what they are doing is, firstly, they give it to their workers, their employees, and their subjects to try this, because this is computer-based test, and you can just do it just with your keyboard. And then it gives you research about what kind of unconscious biases you have, and what kind of where your bias is been biased. So yeah, so this kind of method will help you. And workshop, which means you could talk about your idea and your opinions on the concept that you have, some kind of race, ethnicity, or anything else. That could be helpful for understanding what kind of unconscious biases we have, so that we could have awareness about them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for example, through companies and workshop. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Maybe I hope. Yeah, related to the prior question, that if you are given the test, the implicit association test, and you are given the score, and you have a high unconscious bias, you may not feel good, right? So it's not about not only this, but there is a kind of the methodological difficulties across to measure the psychology. It's on the socially desirable bias. If you know that you are taken to measure your unconscious bias, you take this you may consider or sontaku. You may consider which is better answer. Not to tell your, not to answer from your the truth, true feeling. So that's kind of the social desirability bias. How can we alleviate? To answer unconscious bias, you really that you may be really conscious about to answer this to measure the unconscious bias. There is no simple answer. This is on the issue of the methodological difficulty, not only for this but also for the conducting survey on the social conducting survey of the psychology issues. So if you have any thought?
Yes, it's very difficult to tell about the exact solution, but I believe IAT is just a simple, the basic layer of the solution, and moreover, you have to take, like, human knows, I mean, people knows about what kind of unconscious biases, if you have unconscious bias on them, like, right? So that's always the problem, that if I have a bias on someone, then that someone might fear something bad from me, right? So if you could do that, I mean, if you abbreviate your how you speak and how you act, then I don't want to say he is biased person. Maybe he is has a good manner or a good attitude. Maybe he has some unconscious biases, but he could control himself. So yeah.
Probably one simple way to solve this, not fully solve this issue, but if you take this test to the others, you don't tell them this real objective of this test. If you are given, this is about to measure your unconscious bias, then he may not give us the real true answers. So that would be maybe the one easier way to solve the issues. Any other questions, clarifications? Yes?
Go ahead. No. Okay, so do you see this sort of bias as something to be overcome, or as something that cannot be overcome but people can become more aware of?
I know, like personally, I don't think we can overcome our biases because even we don't really know what kind of bias we have. So these tests are like existing to realize our biases, right? So I think the important thing is like awareing yourself that you have these kind of biases. So you have to be kind of like be careful later on, and that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just related to that question, have any of you taken the IAT test? You did. Is it available for everybody or for anybody to take?
Sure. You can just take. Even it provides you Korean version and Japanese versions, maybe Japanese versions also.
I see. Okay. And I'm not going to ask you to share any secrets, but were you surprised by some of the results that came from it?
Actually, it's just one bias test. It's about skinny people and fat people. So the test. How tested work? They show some word about like skinny person and fat person, or European American and African American, and they connect with good or bad, something like something that you have to judge, right? So European American you don't have to judge, but good, bad you have to judge, right? If they connect it with good or bad to another means, then you have to think like differently. So I took about skinny and fat, and if I try to connect with good with skinny, it's more easier. Then it's more easier to me. But if I try to connect with bad with skinny or good with fat, it took me more time to answer the question. So I think that's the method of the core method of the
Did you identify your own unconscious bias?
Yes, sadly, but yeah, it was good. It was good to try that.
Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed that. And well, two questions. The first thing is IAT is very interesting, and which industry or companies do you think should be interested in this application or test? That's my first question. And second question is, well, you shared your experience, and based on that, how they can use this to maximize the productivity of the workplace, how they can use the result.
So I would say every company who wants to implement or who want to develop their diversity policy and inclusion policy, I think they have to take this test because it doesn't take that much time, it doesn't cost anything. It just, you can go to the online and access to the web page. It provided by Harvard University, and yeah, you can access all the time. Even though those workers who have no time in their workplace, they can just take this at your home because it does not cost your time that much. And for the second answer, I think that we mentioned about something like unconscious bias at work. That's how Google tried to adopt this kind of method and how they try to reduce their unconscious biases in their own employees. So they are going to collect the data together, and then they gather together. They're gonna talk about how they're feeling about the test and the results. They share their emotional feelings and also the result itself. And then eventually they're gonna understand something. They're gonna get some insightful discussion, or it's not about like the solution for everything, but still you can get some good idea from that. So I believe that's a good way to reduce the resorbing unconscious biases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Time is up, and thank you for a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. Yes. And first, I'd like to invite Professor Emeritus, Professor Lee, Professor Emeritus of School of Business Administration at Meiji University. Also, he is also a founder of this English presentation contest. Professor Lee, please.
Thank you very much for your introduction. As a representative, not really, as an example of senior citizen, I express my gratitude for including me in this contest. Yes, it's really a nice feeling to be back here after 2 years of retirement. I'm sure Hugh is going to give a presentation afterwards and talk about, make some comments, I would say, on your contents of the presentation. So I'd like to say something about the skills of giving presentation. Well, who do you think is the most important person in this kind of contest? The presenter, or the audience, or the listener? I would think the listener is more important. From the viewpoint of presenter, you are doing something for your audience, for your listener. Okay? So you really have to make your presentation very easy to understand for listeners. You see, it should be crystal clear. In order to do so, when you construct your presentation, you probably divide your speech into 3 parts: opening, the body, and the closing. The shortest way of making audience know what you're talking about is to tell the audience what you're going to talk about in the opening part. And in the body part, you tell the audience what you really want to tell. And in the closing part, tell the audience what you have told in your presentation. That way, the audience will bring your message home. Very, very easy, right? In addition to that, you shouldn't use big words so often. You shouldn't change slides so quickly. You shouldn't speak too fast, and things like that. But basically, you tell the audience what you want to tell, tell the audience what you want to tell, and tell the audience what you have told. Tell, and tell. That way, you wouldn't really fail to convey your message. Oh, it's I didn't realize that. Anyway, so that's the most important message I'd like to give to you. In addition, let me say something. About 30 years ago, I was working for an American company in New York and also in Northern Virginia. And I felt at that time, I was working for an American company, so my colleagues are mostly Americans and some international stuff. But I never felt I was excluded or alienated. I always felt included. That was a wonderful company. So, I don't know why I left it. Well, I left that company and went into teachings, and I'm glad in the end. So there's no remorse about it. But feeling included is very important for your life, for your motivation, for everything. So when you are really big in the company, please make sure that your company is the kind of company which include diversity. Okay? Thank you very much for listening.
I will try to keep my remarks short and sweet. About inclusion, when I first started working at Meiji, one of the people that really made me feel included was Professor E. So thank you very, very much. Yeah, I was very impressed today with the mechanics of your presentations. Your engagement with the audience, eye contact, in terms of your slides, they were all pretty good, right? They weren't, you didn't have too much text, they're primarily visuals, primarily supporting your viewpoints. So I was all in all very, very impressed with the mechanics of your presentation. I think, well done to all of you on that account. I think, though, if we're looking for areas where we could still step it up a little bit further, it would be primarily on content. And I would start where Professor E suggested, what is your message? What is your core message? And you should, that should be like an arrow. And everything else in your presentation is supporting that, or building to that, or reiterating it, right? So I think sometimes some of the presentations were a little bit, unclear, like, okay, this would be a nice point to make, this would be a nice point to make, this would be a nice point to make, but how it all stuck together could be a little bit improved, right? Just make sure, okay, why am I saying this? Every slide it should be, why am I showing this? Why am I showing this? Why am I showing this? How does it fit into the overall story? Think of the presentation as you're telling a story about a topic, and you're trying to bring the audience along to understand that story. So that would be, are you talking about the need, for example, for greater individual sensitivity within the institution, or are you talking about the need for institutional rules in order to, what is your overall focus would be what I would suggest. But I tell you what, I enjoyed listening to each and every presentation this year. And that's not always been true every year. So I think, all of you, everybody here deserves a warm hand of applause. Thank you very much.